Hey guys, how are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the next generation. Now, in no surprise, the main focus of this conversation does have to do with Nintendo, because I think of all the three companies and three console manufacturers, they're the one with the most unique position when you start to consider how they factor into the next generation and the current generation, what's been happening with their previous console, their current console, the next console, the console coming from Sony and from Microsoft, and just how everything is kind of weird right now. We've never really seen generational switches happen the way they are right now. It's very unique, and Nintendo is the one that makes it kind of the most interesting. It's also a kind of difficult conversation to have and to discuss because of how Nintendo fits into the whole thing. I think when you start to consider the quote next generation and how Nintendo fits into that, you have to kind of break down and understand and decide how you feel about how they fit in with this current generation. Defining what Nintendo has been doing with their previous two consoles and how that means they're going to move into the next one is kind of tricky. You know, what does it mean that they released essentially the first 8th generation machine with the Wii U in 2012, only a year before Sony and Microsoft's also 8th generation machines, the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One? However, only halfway through the lives of those consoles, Nintendo abandoned their 8th generation Wii U and released what is effectively Nintendo's 9th generation console, the Nintendo Switch, in 2017. Again, halfway through the lives of the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. Those two 8th generation consoles still continuing and still having life while Nintendo moved on to kind of a new generation for their own hardware internally. And so what that really kind of means, and I've talked about this before actually, but what that really means is that as Nintendo moved on to their personal 9th generation console, the rest of the industry was still technically existing within the 8th generation. You've got Sony and Microsoft with those two consoles. You've got developers making games on their 8th generation consoles with their 8th generation tech. Nintendo moves on to their 9th generation machine, but also that 9th generation machine's capabilities do not surpass the other two 8th generation machines. And also, if you break it down by percentage, you have one console in its own 9th generation, but the other two still in the same 8th generation. So 2/3 of the industry, of the console industry, I should say, 66.5%, whatever that breaks down to, of the industry is still in the 8th generation. And so, whereas, yes, Nintendo has been on their own 9th generation machine, what I don't think that they did with the Switch, and I know that this will be a controversial statement for Nintendo fans, but it's not meant to be a negative, so try not to take this as a negative thing. But what that means is Nintendo still has yet to move on to the, quote, next generation. At this point, the numbers, the way we number generation, 7th gen, 8th gen, 9th gen, all that stuff, kind of doesn't mean anything anymore. It's kind of becoming irrelevant, and I think it's more about what generation you're in based on the generation itself, not based on the number label we've given it. So Nintendo being at a 9th generation Switch is all good and fine, but they haven't moved on to the next generation. They haven't been part of moving the industry forward into a new era, into a new step of capabilities, even though, okay, the Switch has its capability of switching between a portable and a console, which is amazing and revolutionary, and I love it, but it's not the same as next generation technology as far as like gameplay capabilities. It's really just not, as much as I love the Switch and it's my favorite thing on the market. And so really only when the industry moves on to next generation hardware that really is surpassing and leaping above what we have capable right now between all three players, that's when we're going to see that next generation. And I have to be real with you guys, I think that is clearly defined by the fact that we know this Xbox Scarlett console, whatever it turns out to be, comes out next year, and we know that that's not going to be just a small iterative jump on the Xbox One family of consoles. It is going to be a whole new ballgame, a whole new beast. The same way the Switch was a whole new ballgame compared to the Wii U, that's what the Xbox Scarlett is going to be for the Xbox One family. And obviously a PlayStation 5 is going to be doing the same. We don't yet know the details about the PS5, but we expect it to be coming very soon. We expect it to launch maybe at the end of next year or maybe sometime early in 2021. But by the time we start hitting those machines, regardless of Nintendo still being on their 9th generation Switch, I feel like the next generation will truly start then. And I think it's almost hard to disagree with that. That's really going to be what happens. And so what does that mean for Nintendo and for the Switch? Well, this is also stuff that I've discussed plenty of times in recent videos. I've never really had a video dedicated to this topic and really breaking it down, but I've brought it up, you know, in random thoughts here and there in videos over the past several months. What I think that means is that Nintendo will have some time, due to the success of the Switch, to ride out the next generation. And so if the Xbox One and PS5 come out sometime, you know, late next year, in the next, 18 or so months, we have one or both of those machines released. And we've officially started that next generation. Nintendo still has a very successful Nintendo Switch on their hands. I think it's going to continue to sell gangbusters throughout the rest of 2019. I think in 2020, there's a good chance it continues to sell gangbusters as well. We can expect a game like Bayonetta to be coming out next year. Maybe we get a surprise Mario Kart 9. Unfortunately, Metroid Prime 4 is removed from the current slate, but they might have another weird Metroid surprise game. Heck, we also know they're making Breath of the Wild 2, and so that game could be really far in development or not so far, but there's a chance it's so far in development that it could come out next year. Maybe that's a game that they release to coincide with the launch of the Xbox Scarlett to be their combative sort of product, so that the Scarlett comes out holiday 2020. Well, that's also when Nintendo's releasing Breath of the Wild 2 for the Switch, which is going to be a huge moneymaker and a huge system seller. So what I'm trying to get at here is that I think Nintendo still has a good another probably 2 years of solid momentum from the Switch, and I mean momentum that can carry through the release of next-gen consoles from Sony and Microsoft. And if that proves out to be true, that's a huge thing. That's a huge testament to the quality of Nintendo's Switch device. Whether we get the Pro thing or not, I still think it's just a testament to how good the device is and how much people like it, that it could stave off the initial onslaught of next-gen hardware from Sony and Microsoft. However, and you guys have heard me say this, I do think that that won't last forever. The Switch, Nintendo's, yes, it's their 9th generation machine. Nintendo's 9th generation Switch won't be able to hold off what Sony and Microsoft are doing with their Scarlett and PS5 for very long. A huge part of that is because of the third-party developers around these companies. And honestly, I think that's a huge element that most people overlook. I don't think very many people, besides myself, have ever brought this up when considering the next generation of machines, where the Nintendo Switch fits into everything, if we get the Switch Pro or if we don't. The huge element here isn't that Nintendo's already started the 9th generation with the Switch. To me, that no longer matters like it would have maybe 10 years ago. To me, what I see is once the Scarlett and the PS5 are out on the market, and the technology in those machines and their capabilities is so astronomically above and beyond all three current machines, that means developers, third-party developers, the companies that make games like The Elder Scrolls and Doom and Grand Theft Auto and Call of Duty and Madden and all these different things, they are going to have moved on to that tech. They're going to want to be taking advantage of what those things can do. And Nintendo, as we've learned and seen in the Switch era, very much cares about third-party support. They've very much been reaping the benefits of quality third-party support. They've been selling more Switches. They've been selling more copies of third-party games. The third-party companies themselves have been making money off of Nintendo Switch ports. And so Nintendo can't pretend like, we don't really care what the third-party developers do. We don't care about Ubisoft and Activision and Rockstar and all those. Who cares? They can just keep making games for PS5 and Scarlett. We'll just keep our 2017 Switch going for the next 10 years. They're not going to do that, you guys. They absolutely have to be paying attention. So maybe they could ignore just the PS5 and the Xbox Scarlett, but they can't ignore third-party developers and the games they're going to be making. And so throughout the first year of the PS5 and Scarlett, maybe it's not going to be a big deal. We know that ports aren't really that impressive early on in consoles' lives, but eventually they start to really tap into what those machines and that generation is capable of. And so a year or two after those machines have launched, if Nintendo isn't already moving on to the thing after their 9th gen Switch, they're going to be left in the dust by those companies. And it's not that that would sink Nintendo and they would suddenly fail and they wouldn't be a successful company at all, but it would drastically hurt their overall bottom line, and the Switch will very quickly fade into obscurity. So I think that what will happen is Nintendo is going to move on to the next machine probably within the second year after the PS5 and the Xbox Scarlett have been on the market. They can't ignore those machines. Some people really hate the idea of seeing Nintendo as competitors with Sony and Microsoft. I don't really know why. Yes, Nintendo is unique and carves out its own path, but they absolutely are competitors with those two, just like those two are competitors with Nintendo. They're all in the same sandbox, they're all in the same industry, they are all looking at each other and paying attention to each other and wanting to outdo each other in friendly competition. They don't see it as the console war that a lot of the gaming public and community does, so they can be a little bit more cordial with how they want to beat the other guy, but still, yeah, they want to beat the other guy. And the Switch Pro does sort of affect this a little bit. You know, I mentioned this recently as well. I do think that if there is a Switch Pro device that comes out that's more than the battery life thing, it's more meant to just give some extra time for the current Nintendo Switch hardware than it is to combat or compete with the PS5 and the Xbox Scarlett, because an upgraded current Switch just ain't going to do it. They need to move on to whatever their successor console is after that. What you could call their 10th generation if you wanted to go into the numbers thing, but really, I'm removing the numbers thing from my vocabulary going forward, and I think it's just about next gen, current gen and next gen. You're either in the current generation or you're talking about the next generation. I think that's the way to do it. And so I'm talking about Switch, Xbox One, PS4 as current generation, Xbox Scarlett, PS5, and whatever else from Nintendo is next generation. Nintendo needs to hit that next generation. They can get an extra year out of it, out of the current Switch with the PS4, listen to me, with the Switch Pro, and that's fine, but they're going to be moving on pretty soon after, you guys. Make no mistake. They're all paying attention to each other, and Nintendo will definitely be looking at the next generation probably sooner than a lot of us think. So these are just some ideas and thoughts I've had in my head for a couple of months, and I've been meaning to make a video really discussing just this whole Nintendo fitting into the next gen picture kind of conversation, and today just felt like the right day to do it. There's not really a whole lot of news or anything going on, so I don't know. These are my thoughts on the whole thing. What do you guys think? I do maybe expect some pushback on the whole Nintendo's 9th gen. They're already next gen. They started the next gen. PS5 and Xbox One or Scarlett are just catching up to the Switch. And I know I'm going to get some of that. And all I'm going to say is, hey, you have the right to feel and believe whatever you want. I would never take that away from you. I think that's the wrong approach. I think that that's just simply not true. And the next gen is going to start with the next round of consoles from all three of the manufacturers. Those are my opinions. What do you guys think? How does this break down? What do you think as far as Nintendo current gen? What do you think as far as them next gen? How is this all going to play out? Discuss that below. And with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Ro2R, and I'll catch you next time on another video.